Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are the Black Leaders Advocating for Change the Community Employee Resource Group, which is a group that addresses disparities that affect the Black African American community, as well as encourage and support Black African American employees through educational opportunities and networking initiatives such as this one. Today we are hosting a follow-up conversation with leaders, a post-pandemic roadmap to success. With questions from both the staff and us, the BLACC ERG, we are addressing the challenges we face, acknowledgement of accomplishments we have made thus far, and a discussion to move forward together to reach our goal of being an anti-racist organization. As the title states, this is a follow-up conversation from the first conversation held on June 17th, 2021 in celebration and recognition of Juneteenth. There was great feedback and you all wanted the conversation to continue, so here we are. The BLACC ERG leads consist of myself, Shamira Wilson. I'm a care coordinator at Mount Sinai Doctors Astoria, who will be your moderator today. And the BLACC ERG leads will introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. My name is Robin Gavon. I am a patient advocate here at Mount Sinai, Queens, and a co-lead here at MSQ. Welcome.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Ron Powers. I'm the co-lead for the BLACC ERG at Mount Sinai Morningside, and I serve as the Assistant Director for the Respiratory Therapy Department.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Monica Keith. I'm Operations Manager of the Emergency Department at Mount Sinai Morningside, and I'm also the co-chair of the BLACC ERG at Mount Sinai.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Aminata Dumbuya. I'm the co-lead at the Mount Sinai West BLACC ERG, as well as Assistant Director of Emergency Management. Thank you for joining us today.
Great. So we have three amazing leaders on the panel today with us. And we have Cameron Hernandez, who is an MD, Executive Director and Chief Operating Officer, Senior Vice President, Mount Sinai Queens Professor of Medicine, Geriatrics and Palliative Medicine, Icahn School of Medicine. Arthur Gianelli, who is an MA, MPH, MBA, FACHE, Chief Transformation Officer, Mount Sinai Health System, President, Mount Sinai Morningside. Evan Flato, who is MD, President, Mount Sinai West, Professor of Orthopedics, Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. We also have a special guest with us, who is Sean Lee. He will be keeping us updated on the chat today. Thank you guys so much, and Aminata will start us off with the first question.
Thanks, Shamira. Diversity, equity, and inclusion makes us stronger as an organization. What are your thoughts on making the Mount Sinai Health System a great place to work with efforts to become an anti-racist institution?
So, Amanita, I can start. So good afternoon, everyone, and I want to thank all of you for inviting me again to participate. It's hard to believe it's a year since this last discussion. That's a really good question, and I think the first thing to say is that there really is a lot of work going on to advance Mount Sinai as an equitable and anti-racist organization. As I'm sure all of you know, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, a comprehensive effort was undertaken to develop a roadmap for action with respect to equity and anti-racism. And that work brought together really people from across the health system who don't necessarily work together on a day-to-day basis, but these principles were so important and this effort was so meaningful that it was essential that we brought everyone together to identify 11 strategies, 55 tactics that we're going to undertake to really transform our health system and honor that commitment. And I think what's important to note is that a lot of organizations in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, did a ton to produce similar types of roadmaps. But what I'm proud of here at Mount Sinai is that we've gone beyond just the document and are really working on the implementation and the execution. So we've identified strategy leads for each of the 11 strategies. Each of the strategy leads has identified people to help them to drive the tactics. We're keeping people updated through the broadcasts that come out on a weekly basis that Sean authors, as well as Angela Diaz. And there's some very concrete work happening, whether it's the BLACC Executive Acceleration Program that's been launched, mentoring programs that have been launched. In my strategy, we're doing a number of different things, but one of the things that we're actually working on right now is that I'm trying to pull in people who do lean work in the health system, people who do the equity and anti-racist work, TDL, and also our wellness team, trying to pull them all together and say, you know what, let's work together to define a model of leadership for the next generation here at Mount Sinai. How do we define leadership in a way that encompasses transformation, which is typically the key for leadership, but also how we want to change things through lean transformation, how we want to focus on and support the wellness of our employees. And there's actually something called a wellness leadership model. We want to pull that in. And we want to pull the latest thinking in equity and in anti-racism, pull it all together and have one model of leadership that we teach across the health system. It's really our commitment as leaders to the people who work here in the Mount Sinai health system, that this is how we're going to lead. This is how we're going to connect those dots so that anti-racism and equity are not just fashionable terms. They're not just things that we say when the moment rises for us to say them, but rather they're built into how we teach and train ourselves and future generations of leaders here in the Mount Sinai health system.
I think just to add to that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Evan.
Oh, okay. I mean, that was a great answer, and Art is very eloquent as usual and very comprehensive. It's always hard act following him. I think one of the very important things about this effort is the accountability. That not leaving DEI is the job of the diversity task force or something, but something we're all accountable for as leaders. I'm accountable for my budget. I'm accountable for my volume. I'm accountable for what happens in the hospital. So I should be accountable for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we're developing metrics as part of this so that leaders will be judged not on whether they, talk the talk, but whether they walk the walk. Some of these are very difficult. Strategy 2, unification of practices, have many financial challenges. But for example, we're in the midst of building a 11-story outpatient building on 58th Street. And we pivoted working with Kelly Casano and Jeremy Bowl, the lead for that strategy. And in that building, we're going to be unifying the medical subspecialty practices with our hospital outpatient departments. We're going to be unifying the surgical practices, all insurance types, in single practices. So these are examples of where we want to take bites out of the plan as we move along, rather, than just have, a sort of a dream of how it should be. Also, we're trying to focus on retention as well as recruitment. The example that I may have given last year is at one point I had 3 vice presidents of color in my organization, one of the most diverse in the health system, and now I have none. That's not a good outcome, right? Now, admittedly, one went for a different location in the country, one got promoted to a system role, one got a great job in New York, but, it's a never-ending struggle to maintain progress, and it's something that we need to be judged on. And I think the programs that have been set up, like the Executive Administrative Fellows Program, which has been very productive at the different sites, the BLACC Executive Acceleration Program. I'm an executive sponsor of an executive of color with whom I meet regularly, as well as there's coursework, et cetera, to offer her opportunities for advancement. So we're trying to combine this comprehensive strategy that Art sketched out with very tangible, real steps that we can measure and look at and hold each of us accountable for in this effort. I'm sorry, Cameron, please go ahead.
No worries. I think, these are all great things that we're trying to do. Again, it's about communication for me. It's about getting it out to everyone, not just the 49 people who are on this call, sort of thing, who are looking for this, but there's a lot of people who don't want or don't have access or be able to get onto this call right now, sort of thing. And how do we get to them, sort of thing. And that's what we are continually working on. This is a journey. As we all know, this is a journey. It's sometimes an uncomfortable journey, but a good uncomfortable, if I had to put it any way. I think one of the things that Art has rolled out at Mount Sinai Morningside right now is the Mount Sinai Daily, which is the new app that's coming out. And I know that I've been subscribed to it as a sort of a beta tester, but this is something that will be rolled out to the rest of the health system. It's through the marketing department, and this is a way to get to everyone, not just people who check their emails or look at the broadcast. I know, Sean, you write these amazing broadcasts, but how many people are actually reading their emails? I know that at Queens, it's not so great, and it's always trying to figure out how do you get to the frontline staff. We have the DMB boards. I can't even say it. The daily management boards. We are now putting announcements on there about DEI, about different topics, but that is the way you get to the front line. That's how you get to the people that, for me, really need to hear it. We've been doing a lot on the executive side for the last year and a half, but how are we getting it down? And that's something that we're all trying to improve upon by doing these different things, whether it's through marketing, whether it's through nursing. So I think it's all about keeping a focus on it. And if you don't keep a focus on it, then it just dissipates, sort of thing. So I think all of these little smaller things that we're trying to do and trickle it down are keeping the focus on the work that is so important to all of us.
Wonderful, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So Dr. Fatel kind of touched on my question, but how are you addressing diversity and equity with respect to hiring practices at your respective hospitals? And is this an active endeavor?
I can continue on. It's basically keeping a focus on it, making sure that I'm thinking about it, making sure that everyone who works with me is thinking about it, and asking the question, and not being afraid to ask the question. Do we have any people of color that are looking for this job? Have we reached out far enough? Have we, we don't want to necessarily do warm body syndrome where we just need someone in the position, sort of thing. Warm body syndrome tends to default towards white. If you ask me, that's my personal thing. But the warm body syndrome is something that we all sort of fight. Especially this day and age when staffing is so difficult. To hold out another month, another 2 months to find a bigger and diverse group is something that we all struggle with, and that I know that Art and Evan do this also. That we're really trying to keep that focus and to see how we can get a bigger group to make sure that we're interviewing the best candidates, whether they're any color or any race or any ethnicity or, sort of thing. So it's something we fight with though. It's definitely hard, especially this day and age when we're like, okay, I need a CT tech or I need a, whatever sort of thing, just get someone in, sort of thing. And unfortunately for me, that I always feel like that, like I said, it defaults towards white. So sometimes I have to, dig my heels in a wee bit and get yelled at a little bit from different people, but I think it will better off all of us if we continue to make sure that we are as diverse as possible.
I think there's that's well said, Cameron. There's some tangible things in our medical school searches for chairs of departments or chairs of system. We have formal representation by DEI. We have rules about outreach and kinds of questions we can ask, all designed to have a more diverse search process. And for example, I was on a search where I started talking about gravitas and of a leader, and Dr. Butts taught me and said, gravitas, I've never heard it applied to a woman or to a Black man for that matter. It sort of implies a white guy in a suit. And I hadn't really thought of that before. I sort of reflected on it, did a few Google searches, and found out he was exactly right with the implications of that word for a leader. And I learned to sort of amend how I was speaking about candidates and to think it through, not just the words I use. So there are things we've done in our searches, as well as hiring search firms that have a record of finding diverse candidates. There are some search firms that are better than others of really looking out there for diverse candidates. And then the other piece, which I touched on briefly, is to take a good look at the people we already have working for us in the health system, so that we're tracking up and coming leaders of color and making sure that we're taking a good look at them whenever there's an opening that's coming up, because these are known quantities, people already devoted to the system. And some of these programs, like the BLACC Executive Acceleration Program, start highlighting them and making sure we all get to know them. So I think those are some of the tangible things that can be done to bolster recruitment.
And I'll just add to what Cameron and Evan eloquently said. I'll add a few points. I think one, and Cameron noted this, there needs to be a degree of intentionality, meaning as a leader, you have to set the tone, and you need to make clear that this is important and this is a priority, and you need to walk the walk yourself when you're involved in specific recruitment in your organization. I agree with Cameron. If you don't do that, there's a bias towards white candidates. That's just the way this all kind of shifts. So you have to really work the recruitment to make sure that you've got diverse candidates from whom to choose. So that would be the first point that I'd raise. Second point, I agree with Evan that we absolutely need to be always thinking within. In some of my more recent recruitments that I've talked to HR and I've said, look, I'd love an internal candidate. Let's try to find a person of color or people of color who can serve as candidates for this position. So I'm working actively on a couple of recruitments to do just that. And I do think that's important. I also think it's important to tap the networks of your colleagues of color. I have, we all have our own networks and we all have our own connections. The reality of things is that if you're working with colleagues of color who are in the health system, their networks will probably include more people of color than like my network's going to include. So you know what? Diversify the people that you talk to ask for resumes. You never know who you're gonna find as a result of that. The fourth thing I would note is that one of the challenges that I face, and Evan alluded to this in his hospital, is that I've had three people actually, people of color in prominent positions, administrative positions in my hospital, who've been recruited externally to significant positions in other organizations. So, we had a deputy chief nursing officer who went on to be the chief nursing executive for the Health and Hospitals Corporation. So just a fantastic promotion. And my director of patient experience has gone on to be the chief diversity officer for a major not-for-profit organization. And my chief of staff, who worked directly for me, she's going on to a vice president in the Department of Medicine position for One Brooklyn. These are amazing promotions. These are significant jobs in healthcare in New York. So on the one hand, I'm proud of the fact that we're serving as a really formidable training ground and that we're known for this. But on the other hand, we at Sinai got to figure out, well, we've got these rising stars. We got to figure out how to catch them and keep them and get them in positions here in the health system so that we can advance Mount Sinai to the next step.
Yeah, I think along those lines, one of the things that we always talk about as in leadership is who's going to take over my position, in case something, I move on or I get another position or whatever sort of thing. And I think it's really important that the people of color who are in these positions, we should be asking them now, when you get promoted, because you will get promoted if you're good, when you get promoted, who should be filling your shoes? Sort of thing. And that might be a way to sort of have the perspective that I may not have from their position about who should fill their shoes, and then ask the question, do you think this person should be someone of color, or do you think, whatever, sort of thing. But I think bringing them in on the conversation can also help the I don't want to say replacement value, but, recruitment, sort of thing, and keeping, the people of color in positions that we think that are the right positions within the health system. So it's something that I know I always think about, and I always talk to people, and people are like, why are you asking me this? Are you kicking me out? I'm like, no. I want to know, because at some point you're doing such an amazing job. You are going to get promoted to something, and if you're doing an amazing job, you get promoted, but you always need to have, who's the person behind you, sort of thing. Who's the person who's going to take over your position? This just happened to be in materials management. Thank you, Evan, who's taking my materials management person. He's getting an amazing promotion. And for him, he was like, there's 2 women in my department who need to take into my position. So, a woman of color and then another woman of color to take that person's position. And they already had the pecking order, sort of thing. And we had this conversation months ago. I said, you're going to get tapped at some point to go somewhere else. I didn't know Evan was doing it already, but so it happens, sort of thing. But I was able to, and it's historically a male-driven, profession. And now I have 2 women of color who are in this position, running materials management at Mount Sinai Queens. So, it works. It's just, you have to, again, keep it on your forefront of your mind and think about it as you're going along on your day-to-day basis.
So we do have some questions coming into the Q&A. Do we want to start with that, or? All right, so I'm just going to get into it. How do you build this work into the operational resiliency of the hospitals and the system? And we're going to start with you, Dr. Flair.
Well, I think, I don't want to repeat some of the things I said, but I think it has to go right into the daily work, right into the fabric of how we manage. I think anytime there's a vacancy, it's got to be automatic that we look and see, are we casting a wide net? Are we looking at diverse candidates? Now, look, we're not going to pick a diverse person, for every position, but if we didn't even consider a diverse candidate, we know how it's going to turn out, right? And so I think making that a standard part of every search and every recruitment, all the things that, Art and Cameron said, I think the accountability, I talk to Dr. Butts regularly, and I meet with Pam Abner. She calls it one-to-one coaching, perhaps. It makes it sound a little educational. So I'm being coached on many of these things, and she will challenge me. What's going on here? Do we have any leaders there? So that's part of accountability, where we sort of look over what I've done and what I'm responsible for, and that puts it into the daily flow of that. And again, I think that the resilience of the system is also in not losing candidates. It's one thing to lose a leader to a better job, as Art pointed out, or as I pointed out with some of the people I've lost. But you don't want to lose people to burnout or disappointment or frustration. And so, and that's something that we've talked about with the BLACC ERG groups. I've met with Aminata, I've met with her predecessors. Are we reaching out and talking in a way that people feel this is a sensitive organization that understands these issues? Because otherwise they're going to leave us, and that's not resilience, that's brittleness, What's the opposite of resilient, or whatever the opposite of resilience is, that's what that is. Those are just some of the ways, I look at it.
I mean, we definitely don't want to lose candidates or people who are working here because of racism also. And that unfortunately has happened to me recently, sort of thing. That person was not did not feel comfortable going forward and decided to leave the institution instead. And I found out back end after the fact, which for me, I was upset because she was very good at what she did, sort of thing. And to find that out was sort of somewhat disheartening. It's like, oh, I'm not getting through. I'm not being effective enough as a leader to let people be able to raise racist, things that are happening to this person. And that person decided to leave the institution because of it. So again, it's a work in progress. I try to keep it on the forefront. None of us are perfect, but it's just when that happens, it's sort of like, what did I do wrong? It's almost like you got to do a debrief on yourself, and say, where did she say something to me when we were doing this? Why didn't I ask this question? Should I be asking this question? And maybe I should be asking, flat out, of people of color, have you had any racist issues, in the institution? Have I said anything that's racist? Because God knows there's things that, float through my head that I was, raised with, that I now check myself with, and I've learned, and if not, my husband checks me and says, that's a racist statement. And I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that, sort of thing. And then, try not to say it ever again. But
correct me.
Huh?
My children correct me all.
Oh yeah.
You get in from many levels.
My children are about to start correcting me. They're speaking in English and Spanish, and they're doing it in Spanish, more Spanish than I speak. But anyway, but it is, I think, again, keeping it in the forefront, asking the questions, not being afraid to ask the questions. Again, I think we talked about this last time. I'm a palliative medicine person. I like to name it and then sit on my hands and see what, you seem pissed. You seem like, or whatever, and then just sit on it and see what the person says and get ready. You don't know what they're going to come at you with, but that's the way I think is the best way to get through a lot of these. And for Art to call me eloquent earlier is like, for me, a joke. I'm sort of the bull in the china shop. I just sort of say it and then, oh, here we go. Let's see how it goes. But I think it works in some instances. And I think that really with racism, we have to be head on with it and not, beat around the bush. I think is this racist? Is it not, to some extent? And then there's nuances behind things and stuff like that. But usually the person who's receiving it knows it and either wants to bring it up or they don't want to bring it up. And I'm hoping that we can get more of those people who don't want to bring it up so that they feel comfortable with us being able to change things. That's the only way that we're going to be able to change things, if we know about it and we can, lead through it. Sorry, I know a little bit of a rant, but
no, but you know what? I'll take it from there, Cameron, and say, Sean, that I think all of that gets to how you can the way to develop a resilient organization as it relates to these issues is to hardwire the culture to be resilient, right? So you need to intentionally transform the culture to one where anti-racist actions or an expectation of anti-racism is normative, right? So to Cameron's point, where when you see racism, you call it out and you talk about it, right? And you engage it, as opposed to like pretend it didn't happen or ignore it, which would have been kind of what would have happened in just even a couple of years ago, quite frankly. And that type of approach is educational for everyone. There's things that can be perceived by people of color as racist that as Cameron said. I mean, I've said it for myself too. And I have an interracial marriage, and my children are Black. There's things you might say that you had no intention of being racist, but are perceived as such. But the only way you learn is when these things happen, is that we trust one another enough to confront the issues and talk about them and get educated so that we improve as an organization and improve as individuals. In terms of the hiring practices, I think, again, I think certain approaches need to be normative. There needs to be an expectation that every recruitment involves a diverse slate of candidates, period, hard stop. It's not inadequate, it's not an appropriate recruitment if it doesn't. number one. And frankly, if it doesn't, we haven't tried hard enough, and we need to do more. Number two, and this is part of the roadmap, leaders need to have as part of their compensation structure, it's part of their bonus structure, these types of concerns need to be considered as part of the priority work that we do. Right up there with trying to drive quality or driving safety or driving patient experience or the bottom line, equity and anti-racism need to be on par. All right, and I think that's the important point. They truly need to be on par. They need to not be the side conversation. They need to be the conversation. Every bit as much as money is the conversation, and again, quality, safety, and experience is the conversation as well. We need to expand upon the work that we've been doing, and I really think Sinai's done a very, very nice job. We need to do more in building the pipeline of potential candidates for positions of more and more responsibility within the organization. I think we've laid that foundation really nicely. But then, we need to look at both sides of the equation. You can have a pipeline, but you have to have places for people to land. So you need to connect those two realities. If you have a pipeline and there's no place for people to land, now you've created frustration within the organization, and you put out a set of expectations that you're not meeting. So to the extent that we're committed to the development of a pipeline of people of color to fill important positions within the organization, well, then we have to honor that investment, and the organization needs to be shaped accordingly to allow for people to grow into positions of importance here in the system.
Thank you. All great answers.
Okay, I'll continue with the next question. What do you see as the biggest change on the road to success between before the pandemic and after the pandemic? I'll start with you, Dr. Hernandez.
I know I sound like a broken record, but I think that we are thinking about it and talking about it. And we're keeping a focus on it. And we're letting everyone know as much as possible. Again, we still have a lot of work to do to get this down to the frontline staff. I personally feel, but the more that we think about it, the more that we talk about it, the more likely that it's going to happen. The more that we have open door policies on things that come up, the better off that we're going to be, whether it's our managers or the executives in the C-suite, sort of thing. All of these things need to have an open door policy that are focused on DEI. And we just need to continue, sort of thing, and not be afraid to change course or to find out something's not working, and to really, they call it PDSA cycles, change things relatively rapidly, and not sit on things and try to force it to work, because it's obviously not working if it's not working, and then we need to sort of pivot and move, sort of thing. And I think that all of the executives that I know that we've been working on this are willing to do that, and I think that that's going to be very important going forward, the pivot and move and keeping it in the forefront of everyone's mind post-pandemic.
It's hard to search for silver linings in difficult times, but if there is one, the kind of shock of a reckoning with racism and structural racism and this horrible pandemic sort of blew away business as usual, and any smug complacency where people just, it's not my problem, or I'm just doing my job, that sort of went out the window. So I think if there was a silver lining, is we all really had to be intentional, as Art said, in addressing both of these crises, right? So the task force on racism, the strategies, but also everything we did to fight the pandemic. It was part of a year of rolling up your sleeves and doing jobs you didn't do before, and having to face frontline staff and talk about the problems with everything, right? So, I think that was part of what allowed culture to change. So there, it's a little bit of I don't want to say it's a silver lining, but it's a little bit of what allowed I think some of these things to happen.
Mhm.
I think, I mean, I would agree with everything my colleague said. I think I would only add one. What these last couple of years have done is, I think, really thrown into the air the various pieces of what was normal, what was considered normative, right, pre-pandemic. And those pieces are still in the air. They haven't quite landed yet, and they haven't quite landed, and they certainly haven't landed in an organized way, right? And so what that means, I think, is that we have a real opportunity and a real responsibility to, with design in mind, reshape the terrain, reshape the organization for the future. And any organization that's going to be successful in the future is certainly going to have to build in layers of resilience relative to pandemics in a way that none of us were prepared for. Any organization that's going to be successful in the future is going to have to incorporate wellness, not as a side initiative, but rather as central to how we work with and support our employees. Any organization in the future is going to have to similarly bring equity and anti-racism into the mainstream of the conversation, into the central principles and guiding principles of the organization, into the mission and vision and values of the organization, so that, again, it's right up there with all of the traditional goals that we have as an organization. It needs to be, again, not seen as separate, but seen as integrated into a new way of looking at ourselves and a reshaping of our organization to meet future demands. The moment is really now to do that. Again, nothing is settled. And I think you can see that in the country, right? Everybody's just a little bit on edge for a whole host of reasons, right? We're not where we were pre-pandemic. Everybody's on edge because of crime. Everybody's on edge because of inflation. Everybody's on edge because of uncertainty. Everyone's on edge, even organizationally, with such immense turnover that's occurred, financial challenges and getting back to some version of normal, but not quite what normal was just a couple of years ago. Those are the times where if we're doing the leadership thing right, we take that as an opportunity to really rethink and reshape and position us differently than we were positioned before.
Great answers. We've talked a lot about the things that are being done and some positive results that we've seen. But this next question speaks to how we're going to kind of like keep records of these things. So, gentlemen, what infrastructure changes are needed to better help leaders track, remediate, and reduce negative interpersonal interactions as they pertain to people of color and underrepresented minorities? And we're talking about faculty, staff, students, as well as our other customers and guests, because this can lead to a decreased sense of belonging, and it can actually reduce our bottom line, because if people don't feel they're being respected in the institution, they won't go there. So how do we speak to that? And how do we track these interactions if we have to remediate and counsel our employees and staff about things like that?
Ron, I can start. I think what we have to do, again, if we begin with the premise that the work of equity and anti-racism should not be tangential, but needs to be normative, it needs to be part of the core of what we do, then the infrastructure that you're talking about needs to be core to what we do. So what would that mean? Well, certainly, we have to create, just like we need to create a culture of safety from a clinical standpoint, we need to create a culture with intentionality where if these sorts of things occur, that our employees feel comfortable, feel safe in raising the issue, in saying, hey, I need to talk to you about what has occurred to me, and that there would be an expectation that the leadership of the organization would do what we would do if there were a safety event. that it would be investigated to the fullest, and that we would put plans of correction as appropriate in place. I think that's the level that we need to think about it. Just like safety is core to who we are as a hospital, equity needs to be core to who we are as an employer, as well as a hospital. I also think from an infrastructure standpoint, we need the continued training and education. I am sensitive. I think it was a point that Cameron's been making. I spend a great deal of time talking about these issues in a lot of different forums such as this, right? But folks that are working, doing the day-to-day, taking care of patients, getting the job done, they're not having these conversations, right? They're not necessarily knowing that even the leadership is engaged in these conversations. There is a disconnect. So I do think work needs to be done to figure out how we can make sure that folks who are doing the day-to-day frontline work are able to plug in to what's occurring organizationally. And then also we need to create venues where we're able to talk to one another. We're able to give folks a little bit of time to step away from their day-to-day and engage the leadership. I mean, I find it's always fascinating. We've had the president's panels over at Mount Sinai Morningside, and so those are opportunities, Ron, where we're able to, where I'm able to talk to folks that I don't normally talk to every day. And you learn a great deal from those conversations. You learn what isn't making its way through the organization, and you learn perspectives that you may not necessarily appreciate, from your vantage point. So creating venues, organizationally, creating venues for those kinds of, conversations across and up and down the organization, I think really do matter as well. So it's safe space, Ron. It's creating, just like we drive for culture safety, it's a culture of equity, right? And they need to be side by side. It's the training and education that we do provide, but then it's also the communication across and up and down the organization, so that as many people can benefit from this work we're doing to ourselves and with ourselves, as many people can benefit from it as possible.
Dr. Pertain, Hernandez.
Yeah, I can just add to that. I think that we also need to, within our institution, really work with our partners in human resources and really make sure that we are hand in hand with them to understand, because it's amazing the stuff that I learn when I sit down with my human resources director, and she tells me some of this stuff and I'm like, what? This is happening where? Did we get ahead of this? How did we work on this? Sort of thing. And really having those conversations so that we can then potentially try something or do something different, or mold something and then try it out. I think, again, to Evan's point, really getting it down to the frontline staff is going to be very important to show that we're doing this. I think for me, just talking about this makes me think more that while I'm doing my rounds, that I should be bringing it up on the, in association with the daily management boards, as we continue to sort of have a focus where, right now at Mount Sinai Queens, it's heavily nursing. I'm trying to get the PAs involved, the doctors involved, the social workers involved. I know that's more on the clinical side and the inpatient side, but I think it's sort of a great opportunity to touch a lot of people in a short amount of time. If that on the daily management boards, there's something about DEI, or asking a question of the month or a question of the week, sort of thing. Have you had any racist patients, or have you had any racist interactions with your, and just calling it out and seeing what happens. It's amazing what you'll hear, and then figure out how to address those. And it's not just asking about them, but it's also following up on it and making sure that you follow up with something that is potentially meaningful that can either curb this, change it, or change the situation. So I think, again, and I know I just keep harping on this, but it's really we got to get it down to everyone, so that a lot of times everyone can tell us what to do and us not having to tell them what to do, sort of thing. Because I think it's better if it's a grassroots that we're seeing this. here's my idea on how to change that. What are your thoughts as an executive? Great, come on in my office, let's have a conversation. Come on into human resources. We meet with human resources, let's have a conversation. I think that's, for human resources, is probably the place in my mind, at Mount Sinai Queens at least, where a lot of this stuff is quote unquote documented. It's about then where do you do with that repository of people having, this complaint, or that's, to make a change. And so that's where the executive office works with the human resources to then come up with ideas, bring it down to the frontline staff. Do you think this would work? Yes, no, let's try it out and move from there.
Great.
This is such an important topic. Let me give you an example of how not to do it right. You mentioned human resources. We had an incident where one employee used a racial epithet, to another employee. And as you may know, HR investigations are confidential, right? I mean, you don't just do a public trial, that hour. But then you think of the 5 or 10 employees who heard about it or witnessed it. What message do they get if nothing happens, right? And they don't see anything happening. This happened. It's happened in my hospital, and not only that, it may have been the first incident with that employee, so it doesn't lead to termination right away, or maybe the facts are hard. It looks like nothing's being done, right? So, we sort of did a debrief, like Art was talking about, using the safety model. And we sort of thought through what we should have done. We should have immediately gone to that work environment and talked about how racism is unacceptable. Language is just not allowed. This is going to be investigated. We have to follow principles of law and evidence and, all the things we have to do by, legally and by HR. But that doesn't mean we're silent about it. It's just a small example of, I think, where you always have to up your game if you really want to get this message out.
Thank you all for all those amazing answers. We do have a few more questions, as well as a question in the chat, but with almost 10 minutes left, I'm going to go ahead and ask the last question, which is, in promoting equity and mentorship and its importance of having a strong foundation, why is including mentors and mentees from all backgrounds essential?
This is huge. So I'll grandstand for a second. Mentors are everything, have been everything for me. I've always been the middle of the pack guy, a little lower than the standard deviation on every test. But I've had really, really, really good mentors who have put me out there and have gotten me to the position that I'm in. So, and it's very important that we seek and find mentors and mentees who are of color, who can give a different perspective on whatever the mentee or mentor needs. I can't tell you this. I'm really, really passionate about mentors. And I would not be here if I didn't have specifically two women, one of color, one white woman, who have put me in the forefront and said, you should just try this. The worst they can say is no, and I'm like, okay, let me try it. And I got jobs because of that, sort of thing. I would have never, ever thought of doing it. And I think that looking back and looking forward, that I should be looking to see who are good mentors of color and how they can mentor others of color and of white, sort of thing, and to give that different perspective that they may not get from a mentor that looks like them. So that's me personally on that. For me, it was having women, mentoring me, and not men, and not white men, to be very frank. And it has made a huge difference in my life. So I think, just keeping on the forefront and really thinking about it as we go forward. But if you don't have a mentor, you should be seeking one. You should be speaking to your managers, and coming up and finding someone, because it is invaluable. And sometimes you'll find out there's bad mentors and there's good mentors. And when you find the bad one, you learn from what they did poorly and you move on and you make sure that you don't find that in the next one. But again, don't be afraid to change and move on and not sit on something for too long and try to force a round peg in a square hole. Just do it.
Well, I'm a surgeon, so the surgical field is all about mentorship because you learn at the hands of another surgeon. And mentorship is a very complex psychological thing. I mean, it's not just a matter of learning a craft. You sort of, when you're young, you sort of look up to your mentors as like, I want to be like that person. What an exciting thing. And if you don't see people that look like you, or at least talk your language or can speak to your experience, you don't connect. You start to think, well, that's some distant goal. I should do something else. So I agree with what Cameron said. We need to have mentors in clinical fields, in administrative areas, in nursing, so that people can look. We're trying to move it up the pipeline too, in terms of high school students, college students, not just wait and say, we looked for a chair of a department and we didn't have any candidates that really had that experience. Well, you got to start pretty early to get people excited about a certain line of work. And that may not happen overnight, right? I mean, you may be spending a little bit of your time on something that's going to come to fruition in 20 years, and a little bit that's going to happen in 10 years, and a little bit that's going to happen right now. But that's so important, and it's hard. It's hard work. Good question.
No, it's an excellent question. Cameron and Evan gave terrific answers. I'm gonna focus on sort of the flip side of the mentorship coin, and that's sponsorship. So I think as important as mentorship is, and as important as diversity amongst mentors is, in order for people to see themselves and see a pathway for themselves by seeing people who look like them, that all of that matters. I also think the sponsorship piece matters as well, and that is where there are people in positions of power, positional power, who have the ability to be able to open doors and make connections and give recommendations and help to launch otherwise nascent careers. And I think diversity amongst sponsors is important too, because again, I think you need diversity all the way through, and it shouldn't be that there are areas that are foreclosed. I mean, that's not the kind of organization we're trying to build. And I think I know. Look, I have a as I said, I'm part of an interracial marriage. I have 2 children that I adopted. So I have a Black son, and there are conversations that I can have with him, and there are certain times where I know I'm an inadequate mentor. He needs to talk to someone who looks like him, has had more of his experiences by living in skin similar to his. I'm just going to call it that way. And I think it's just important for all of us to know that for better or for worse in this country, that exists. And as long as that exists in this country, then we have to create space for people to connect with other people in bigger positions that look like them and have had similar lived experiences, because they've lived in skin that's very similar to the color of theirs.
Thank you so much for those answers. I believe Ron will wrap us up now.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you again for your thoughtful and informative answers. It's been a pleasure hosting you once again, and I think we're well on our way to paving that roadmap to anti-racism. So to the audience, I want to thank all of you on behalf of the BLACC ERG and the Office of Diversity and Inclusion for taking time out of your day to come and spend with us. And hopefully you were informed, enlightened, encouraged, and most importantly, empowered to help us with this work. We can talk about it all day long, but if we don't start actually doing it, it won't get done. So with that, I'll just say again, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a happy Easter weekend and all the best. Thank you.
Thanks all. Thank you so much.